Hello, and welcome back to Sleepy Hollow Whispers. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales whispered from the mists of Sleepy Hollow, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1. Every night before I fall asleep, I put something on in the background. Music, white noise, a podcast I won't remember in the morning, anything that keeps the room from feeling too quiet. I can't stand the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing. I also keep the lights off. I've never been able to sleep with light pressing through my eyelids. Even a lamp across the room makes my brain feel like it's still supposed to be awake. I've done this for as long as I can remember, so it's not strange to me. What is strange is that once a month, every month, I wake up in the middle of the night on the 3rd. Not around the 3rd, not sometimes. The 3rd, like someone put it on a calendar and set an alarm I can't hear. I always wake up between 3 and 4 in the morning. No nightmare. No noise that I remember. No reason. Just my eyes opening like they're being pulled open, and my body already tense before my brain can catch up. My mom noticed it first when I was little. I'd come shuffling into the hallway with that half-asleep look kids get, rubbing my face, asking for water. She's a pretty relaxed person, the kind who assumes most things have a normal explanation, so she never made a big deal about it. She'd walk me back to bed, tuck me in, and that was that. As I got older, it stayed the same. The only difference was I stopped going to her room when it happened. I'd just lie there awake until I finally drifted off again. By morning, the whole thing felt stupid, like waking up was the most normal thing in the world and I'd been dramatic for no reason. I didn't think of it as anything supernatural. I didn't even think of it as a problem. It was just one of those weird quirks you live with, like a knee that cracks when you stand up, or a habit of checking the lock twice before bed. Then last night, I was in a call with some friends, and for whatever reason, we started trading ghost stories. Most of them sounded fake. Aiden, for example, told this story about driving with his dad late at night, some long trip to Ohio, and seeing a woman in a white dress standing in the road. He swore the headlights went right through her, like she wasn't solid. He described his dad slamming the brakes and yelling, and then when they looked again, she was gone. I didn't buy it. I didn't say that out loud, but I'm not subtle. They could tell I didn't buy it, and of course that made them push harder. "Come on," Ryan said. "You've got to have something." "I don't." I told them. I've never seen anything. I've never heard anything. No haunted houses. No creepy voices. Nothing. They called me boring. They called me lame. They said I was the kind of person who would get murdered in a horror movie because I'd be too rational to run. I laughed. But after a minute, I tried to think of anything that even sounded unusual. The only thing that came to mind was the 3rd of the month thing. So I told them. I told them how I always wake up, how it's been happening since I was a kid, and how I never knew why. I said it like it was a fun little odd fact about me, something mildly creepy that still had a normal explanation if you squinted. Instead of laughing, both of them got weirdly interested. "Have you ever tried to stay up all night?" Aiden asked. I hadn't. The idea honestly never occurred to me. When I wake up, I'm awake. That's the whole point. It's not like I can stop it by trying harder. But they latched on to the idea immediately, like it was an experiment. "Do it," Ryan said. "Tonight. It's the 3rd, right?" "It is," I admitted. "Stay up," Aiden said. "On call. Webcam on. If you always wake up, maybe you're waking up because something happens. If you're already awake, maybe you'll see it, That was the moment I should have laughed and said no. I had work in the morning. I'm not a teenager anymore. I don't have the kind of job where you can show up half dead and still coast through the day, but the way they said it got under my skin. Not like I was scared, exactly. More like I suddenly wanted proof that nothing was wrong. Like if I stayed awake and nothing happened, I'd finally stop wondering about it. So I agreed. That's how I ended up sitting at my desk at almost 3 in the morning, with my room lit only by my monitor and the little red dot of my webcam, trying to keep my eyes open, while my friends watched me like I was going to do something entertaining. Aiden yawned loudly into his mic. "Alan, stay awake, man." "Huh?" I blinked hard and rubbed my face. I hadn't realized my head had dipped. Ryan laughed. "You're already losing." "I'm going to make coffee," I said, pushing my chair back. "I'll be right back." As I took my headphones off, the audio switched to my speakers for a second, and I heard Aiden say, "Alan, make me a coffee too," followed by a few giggles. I glanced at the webcam, shook my head, and smiled despite myself. I looked at the time on my PC. 2:45 a.m. I remember that clearly because I remember thinking, I work tomorrow. Why am I doing this? My chair creaked when I stood. I walked into the hallway and the floorboards complained under my feet. The house is old, and it makes noise in the way old houses do, like it's always settling. Every step sounded louder at that hour, like the building itself was trying to announce me. I headed to the kitchen. More creaks. More little snaps and groans from wood, loud enough that if anyone in the house were a light sleeper, they'd wake up. The kitchen felt colder than my room. I filled the kettle, set things up, waited for the coffee maker to do its job. With nothing to listen to, no headphones, no call, it felt too quiet. I twiddled my thumbs on the counter and realized I'd left my phone in my room on my desk. When the coffee was finally ready, I poured it too fast and took a sip too fast and burned my tongue. Too hot, bitter. My eyes watered. But I needed it. The whole point was staying awake. On the way back to my room, the house felt different. Not like something had changed in the air, not like I heard a noise, just silent, in a way that didn't feel normal. Like when you walk into a forest in winter and realize you can't hear birds, can't hear wind, can't hear anything moving. It wasn't peace, it was absence. I stepped into my room and set the cup down on the desk. As I sat back down, my headphones, still lying there, gave off a faint buzz. Just a short vibration, like the speaker had caught a signal and then swallowed it. I glanced at the time. 3 a.m. That didn't make sense. I hadn't been gone 15 minutes. Coffee takes time, sure, but not that much time. Not when I'd been staring at the machine like it was a countdown timer. I stared at the clock a little longer than I meant to, trying to decide if I was overthinking it. Then I told myself to stop being dramatic and put my headphones back on. "Alan, what took you so long?" Ryan asked. "Get lost?" I didn't feel like joking. "It's 3:00, I said. "Nothing happened." "Are you too happy?" Aiden laughed. Behind you, I let out a short breath and tried to sound annoyed instead of rattled. "Stop messing with me. That's so immature. No, seriously," Ryan said. His voice changed a little, like he was trying to sound convincing. "Look behind you." I hesitated. It was obviously a joke. It was the oldest trick in the book. There was nothing behind me. I started to tell myself that again, and then I turned anyway. Nothing was there. "Look at him," Ryan said, laughing. "There's no way he actually fell for that." I turned back toward the monitor, and that's when I saw it. Not in the room, not in the call. In the corner of my doorway, there was something that didn't match the dark. An outline. It looked like the shape of a person standing in the hall, angled slightly forward, like they were looking down into my room. Except the shape didn't make sense. If someone was standing there, the light from my monitor should have caught them in some way. A shoulder, a hand, a sleeve, something. But this was just a darker cutout against darkness. A silhouette that felt too clean, too sure of itself. They would have to be tall. Too tall. The top of the outline reached higher than the doorframe in a way my brain didn't want to process. I felt my body try to act normal on its own, like if I didn't react, it couldn't be real. I slowly turned back toward my monitor, forcing myself to keep my face steady, forcing my breathing to stay even, like I was still just sitting with my friends in a normal late night call. "Is he okay?" I heard Aiden ask. "Yeah," I said quickly. "No, I'm fine. You know we're messing with you, right?" Aiden said, but he sounded confused now, not joking, like he expected me to laugh and I wasn't doing it. I clicked to check my webcam preview, wanting to see what they were seeing. On camera, there was nothing behind me, just my messy bed, the half-open closet door, the wall. My mind must be playing tricks on me, I told myself. And I took another sip of coffee. The heat stung my burned tongue. Then I heard my mom's voice from down the hall. "Alan, honey, did you make coffee for me as well?" My stomach tightened. I hadn't heard her wake up. I hadn't heard a door open. I hadn't heard footsteps. Just her voice, suddenly there, like she'd been standing in the dark hallway for a while. I swallowed. "No, I didn't. Do you want some?" Ryan's voice came through my headphones, a little too sharp. "Alan, are you good?" I didn't answer him right away. I couldn't stop staring at the doorway. My skin crawled with the urge to turn around again, to confirm what I'd seen, to prove to myself that it wasn't there. I set the coffee down carefully. The floor creaked behind me. Not the old settling creak you hear when the house cools. A real weighted creak, like someone had shifted their foot. "Did you hear that?" I asked, and my voice sounded thin. A second later, the call dropped. The audio cut out first, then the video froze, then everything went dead. I clicked around fast, Discord, the group chat, anything, trying to get them back like their voices could anchor me. Nothing loaded. No Wi-Fi. The room got colder. Not a slow chill. A sudden cold that made my arms tighten and my shoulders pull in. It felt like all the warmth had been pulled out at once, like the air had been replaced with something thin and wrong. I started tapping my foot against the floor without realizing it, just to make noise, just to remind myself I could still do something. Then the knocking started. Knock, knock, knock. It echoed down the hall, not at my door, farther away like it was coming from somewhere deeper in the house. Then again, closer. Then again, closer, as if the sound itself was moving toward me. "Alan, honey, coffee?" My mom called again. But this time, it didn't sound quite right. The words were correct. The tone was close, but something was off in the spacing between syllables, like the voice was being played through a device that kept skipping. My neck itched, a sharp, nervous itch under the skin, the kind that makes you want to claw at yourself. I forced myself to turn toward the doorway. I grabbed my phone from the desk with shaking hands and called Aiden. It rang longer than it should have. I kept staring at the hall as it rang, expecting the outline to step forward, expecting my mom to appear, expecting anything. Aiden finally answered. "Yo, what happened? You left." Relief hit me so hard it made me dizzy. Then the call cut out. Not like he hung up, like the connection was grabbed and torn away. From the doorway, I heard scratching. Not on the floor, not like a pet pawing at something. Higher up, like nails dragged across wood. Slow, deliberate, testing. I didn't move. My whole body felt locked. Alan, I'm coming in, something said. The voice sounded like Ryan, but wrong in a way that made my stomach turn. It kept dropping pieces of itself between words, like it couldn't hold the sentence together, like it was learning how to talk by copying someone else. Then I heard something moving along the wall, crawling, not footsteps, a skittering motion, the way a big spider moves when it's too close to you and you can hear tiny taps as it shifts its weight. Tap, tap, tap. The taps traveled upward, higher, closer, until they stopped. Right above me. The urge to look up was immediate and overpowering. My eyes wanted to go there the way your eyes snap to movement without asking permission. Every instinct screamed at me not to. But it didn't matter. My body did it anyway. Something colorless clung to the ceiling. Not black, not a shadow. More like a hole where color should have been. A patch of nothing that had weight. The light from my monitor bent toward it. I watched it happen. The glow stretched, thinned, and angled upward like it was being pulled in. My ceiling fan was gone. Not broken. Not hidden in darkness. Gone. There was only that thing and the warped light reaching toward it. From the hallway, my mom's voice again. Too gentle. Too practiced. Alan, are you good? I snapped to my feet so fast my chair fell backward. It hit the floor with a loud crash, and for a second I thought, good. Noise. Real noise. Maybe this will wake me up. The thing on the ceiling didn't move. Or maybe it did, but not in a way I could understand. I ran. I sprinted out of my room, down the hall, and into the bathroom. I slammed the door hard enough to rattle the mirror. I locked it and backed away, breathing so fast my chest hurt. From my bedroom, that voice came again. Same words, wrong rhythm. Go to sleep. It's late. Then more scratching, more tapping. Then the same voices repeating the same sentences, like a loop that kept restarting. Coffee. Are you good? Go to sleep. Are you there? Over and over. Hours of it. Stretching time until I couldn't tell if it had been 10 minutes or 50. At some point, the sound stopped, and I couldn't decide which was worse, the noise or the silence. I stayed in the bathroom, sitting on the closed toilet lid, listening for anything. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't want to see my own face in the mirror and not recognize it. I didn't want to give the dark a new shape to work with. I waited until my legs went numb. Then I waited longer. Finally, when my body couldn't hold that tension anymore, I forced myself to unlock the door. I opened it a crack and looked into the hallway. Nothing. No outline. No colorless patch on the ceiling. No tapping. No voices. I crept toward my room like I was walking through someone else's house. Every board that creaked made my heart jump. My bedroom window was open. I hadn't opened it. Light spilled in through the gap, pale and weak at first, then stronger as I stood there watching it. Sunrise. I walked to my desk and checked the time. 5:54 a.m. The call was gone. The group chat showed everyone offline, like they'd never been there at all. My Wi-Fi was working again. Everything looked normal, which somehow made it worse. For the next hour, I tried to explain it. Lack of sleep, caffeine, anxiety. My brain making patterns out of shadows because I'd been primed by the conversation, by the letter date coincidence, by the pressure of staying awake to see something. But it didn't fit. I know what being tired feels like. I know what paranoia feels like after watching too many horror videos at night. This wasn't that. This felt like something using familiar voices like keys, trying each one until something unlocked. I called off work. I couldn't imagine sitting in a meeting pretending my hands weren't still shaking. And now I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do with it. I'm scared to leave my room. I'm scared to look out my window for too long. I keep thinking about next month, about the 3rd, about 3 a.m., like it's a time slot something is reserved for me. The worst part isn't even what I saw on the ceiling. It's that it sounded like my mom. It sounded like my friends. It knew exactly how to say the right words in the right order, and it still didn't sound human when it did it. If anyone has advice, real advice, not jokes, please, anything. Because I don't want to find out what happens if I fall asleep next time. Story 2. In 1993, my wife and I had been married a little over a year. We were happy, trying to build a life, and we wanted to move closer to our parents. We didn't have much money, so we were looking for something affordable, even if it wasn't perfect. We just needed a quiet place to live while we got on our feet. That search led us to a rental trailer out in the country. It sat on what used to be an old hog farm, about 80 acres of open land. The place was isolated in a way that felt almost unreal if you're used to neighborhoods and streetlights. There wasn't another trailer nearby, no close neighbors, no convenience store down the road. Just fields, trees, and long stretches of quiet. The only other house on the property belonged to the owners, and it was about 200 yards away. There was also an old barn, worn down and weather-stained, standing like it had been there forever. At first, we thought we'd gotten lucky. The trailer wasn't fancy, but it was cheap, and it was close enough to our families. The land around it was peaceful. When the wind was right, you could hear the trees move and the barn creak. At night, the stars were brighter than anything you see in town. The owners were an unusual pair, but not in a bad way. The wife was a farrier. She worked with horses for a living, putting shoes on them and taking care of their hooves. That meant she spent a lot of time in and out of the barn. The husband worked for the railroad and kept a steady schedule. They had 2 kids, a 14-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son. The kids were the kind you only saw more often back then, outside all day, climbing, running around, doing whatever kids do when they have acres to roam and nothing electronic to. Hold their attention. This was long before everyone had the internet in their pocket. No social media, no security cameras you could install in 10 minutes, no quick way to look up the history of a property. If something was wrong somewhere, you found out the slow way. You learned it by living there. Not long after we moved in, I started noticing things that didn't make sense. I need to explain something about myself here. When I was a kid, I had experiences that I can only describe as encounters with spirits. I'm not saying I understood it then, and I'm not saying I understand it now, but it wasn't a brand new idea to me. I'd seen and felt things before that other people couldn't. So when weird things started happening in that trailer, my mind went to the same place it always had. I told my wife, carefully, that I thought the place might be haunted. She believed in spirits, at least in theory. She wasn't someone who laughed at the idea, but she'd never had anything happen to her personally. She'd never experienced anything that made her look over her shoulder or question what she was seeing. So, she listened, but I could tell she wasn't sure. Then, the disturbances got worse. It wasn't like it only happened at night, when you could blame it on nerves or imagination. It happened during the day, too. It was constant, like something in that trailer didn't care whether the sun was up or down. A door would slam hard enough to make the walls shake, even when there was no wind. Another door would swing open on its own. Cabinets would pop open suddenly, sometimes with enough force that things inside would fall out and clatter onto the counter or the floor. You'd shut them, latch them, even double-check them, and later you'd hear the same sharp bang and find them open again. At first we tried to be practical about it. Maybe the trailer wasn't level. Maybe the hinges were loose. Maybe the whole place shifted when the temperature changed. Trailers can do that. They settle. They creak. They warp. But what was happening didn't feel like normal settling. It felt targeted, like the trailer was reacting to us being there. As the days passed, my wife started to change. She was still trying to stay calm, but I'd catch her pausing when a cabinet door moved or when a room went quiet in a strange way. She stopped laughing it off. She started asking me if I heard things, too. When you live with someone, you can tell when their confidence is slipping. You can see the moment when they stop thinking you're being dramatic and start realizing something is wrong. One evening, something happened that still sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, but it scared my wife badly enough that it sticks in my mind. She came running into the trailer like she was being chased. And she was, by a raccoon. Not a normal raccoon, either. It looked sick. Its fur was patchy, its movements were wrong, and it had this desperate, frantic energy. It followed her right up to the trailer like it had decided she was the only thing in the world worth focusing on. That might not sound paranormal, but it was part of the pattern. It felt like the property itself was turning on us, using whatever it could. I didn't want the raccoon hanging around, and I didn't want it suffering either. So I set a live trap with cat food. It didn't take long at all. Within an hour, the raccoon was inside the trap. It was clearly sick. At least, it looked that way. And I made a decision that I thought was the humane one. I got my .22 handgun, walked up to the trap, and from about a foot away, I shot it to put it down quickly. I don't enjoy killing animals. I'm not someone who does it for sport, but it seemed like the right thing. A mercy. The next morning, I went outside expecting to see a dead raccoon in that trap. Instead, it was standing there calmly. Not thrashing, not weak, not dying. It looked fine. Better than fine. It looked healthy, alert, and strangely calm, like nothing had happened the night before. I remember just staring at it, trying to make my brain accept what my eyes were seeing. I knew what I had done. I knew the distance. I knew the sound of the shot. I knew the certainty of it. But there it was anyway. I didn't even try to argue with reality. I just knew I didn't want that thing anywhere near our home. I loaded the trap into the truck, drove miles away, and released it. I didn't care where it went as long as it wasn't coming back to that property. That should have been the moment we packed up and left, but life doesn't always work like that. We didn't have extra money sitting around. We didn't have another place lined up. And back then, without phones in your hand every second and no easy way to document things, you just dealt with what you had. So we stayed. We tried to adapt. But the activity in the trailer kept building. It wasn't just doors and cabinets anymore. It was the atmosphere, the feeling that the air itself was heavy, the sense that something was close, something you couldn't see. Sometimes I'd be sitting in the living room and the hair on my arms would rise for no reason, and I'd feel like I needed to look behind me. One night, something happened outside that scared me in a different way. I heard branches snapping in the trees around the trailer. Not a soft crack like something small climbing around, but loud breaks, one after another, like someone was out there grabbing limbs and snapping them for fun. It sounded like the woods were being torn apart. I rushed to the door and stepped outside, ready to yell at whoever was out there, or at least shine a light and see what was going on. The moment I stepped out, it stopped. Instant silence. No footsteps. No rustling. No animal noises. Just the night and the wind. I stood there for a while, staring into the darkness, feeling ridiculous and uneasy at the same time. Then I went back inside. Not long after, the breaking started again. I went out again. Same thing. Silence the instant I crossed the threshold. It happened a third time. By then I wasn't just annoyed, I was angry. It felt like something was messing with me, like it wanted me to come outside, like It wanted to see how many times it could pull me to the door. After that night, I finally decided I needed answers from the owners. Until then, I'd avoided bringing it up because I didn't want to sound crazy. And in 1993, people didn't talk openly about paranormal things the way they do now. There weren't 1,000 TV shows about it. You couldn't just say, "I think my house is haunted," and expect a normal conversation. You risked being labeled the weird tenant. But I couldn't keep pretending it was nothing. So I asked the wife, carefully, politely, if anything had ever happened on that property, if there was any history we should know about. To my surprise, she didn't laugh. She didn't act shocked. She didn't even hesitate much. She told me 3 people had died there before they bought the farm. An old man and his 2 sons. They didn't die in one incident. It was 3 separate farming accidents over time. The kind of tragedies rural properties sometimes collect. Machines, animals, hard work, and one wrong moment. Hearing that didn't make me feel better. It made the whole place feel darker, like it had a reason now, like it had a story behind it that we had stepped into without knowing. After that conversation, the activity seemed to get worse, not better. Lights would flicker even when the bulbs were new. Doors would slam harder than before. Cabinets would fly open like someone had yanked them. And there was this growing feeling of pressure in the trailer, especially at night. It's hard to explain that feeling to someone who's never had it. It wasn't just fear. It was like the space around us was crowded, like we weren't alone even when we were. My wife started admitting she felt it too. She started asking me to check rooms before she went in. She started sleeping lighter, waking up at small sounds. We were both on edge. You can't live like that for long without it changing you. Then came our last night there. The trailer had been built in the 1970s, and the master bedroom had windows on 3 walls. The windows started about halfway up the wall, so when you were lying in bed, you couldn't see out unless you sat up or the bed was high enough. Our bed was high enough. It sat about 3 feet off the floor, and I usually slept on the right side against the wall. It was just our routine. That night, we went to bed like we always did, even though the mood in the trailer felt tense. The usual things started happening soon after. Doors opening even though they were locked. The sound of movement where there shouldn't have been movement. The feeling that something was walking through the rooms without needing to touch the floor. We lay there in the dark, trying to ignore it. Trying to do what people do when they're trapped somewhere they don't feel safe, pretend sleep will come and morning will fix it. I don't know how much time passed, maybe 5 minutes, but something forced me awake. Not like I drifted up slowly. I snapped awake, eyes open, fully alert, like someone had flipped a switch inside me. And the first thing I realized was that I was staring out the windows. I shouldn't have been able to see out the windows from where I was lying, but my line of sight was wrong. Everything about my position felt wrong. It took a second for my brain to catch up. The bed was lifted, not tilted, not shaking, lifted up off the floor. As I tried to process that, my wife started screaming. She wasn't asleep yet, which meant she saw it happening too. Her scream was pure panic, the kind that comes from someone who has no words left. And then the bed dropped. It slammed down so hard that all 4 legs punched through the trailer floor. The whole frame crashed like a car accident inside that small room. The impact shook the walls. For a second, we were just frozen, both of us trying to understand how something like that could happen without any human hands touching it. I'm a big guy, 6'3", around 230 pounds at the time, and I was in the military. I'd been through hard things in my life. I thought I was tough. I thought fear was something I could control. That moment proved I was wrong. There was no toughness in me then. just terror. We scrambled out of bed, crawling and climbing over each other in a blind rush to get out of the trailer. I remember grabbing my keys because some part of my brain was still trying to be practical, still trying to follow the steps of escape like it was a drill. We ran to the truck. I got in, shoved the key into the ignition, and turned it. Nothing. Not a slow crank. Not a weak attempt. Just dead, like the battery had been ripped out. My wife was crying and shaking beside me. My hands were slick with sweat. I kept turning the key like that would change something, and then we heard it again, the sound of trees breaking. Branches snapping in the darkness around us, loud and close, like whatever had been inside the trailer was now outside, too. Like it had moved with us. That was the moment prayer became the only thing we had left. I wasn't thinking about pride or how I sounded. I wasn't thinking about whether someone might judge me later. I just started praying. My wife did, too. We prayed like people do when they feel completely powerless. After what felt like forever, I tried the key again. The truck started. Just like that. Like nothing had ever been wrong. We didn't stop to question it. I put the truck in gear, and we left. We drove straight to my parents' house, shaking the whole way, checking mirrors, jumping at every shadow on the roadside. That night, we didn't sleep. We prayed. We sat with the lights on, and we did the same thing for the next 3 nights, because neither of us could trust darkness anymore. As soon as I could, I found a condo in town. I didn't care if it cost more. I didn't care if it wasn't ideal. I just needed my wife out of that place. When we went back to the trailer to get our things, we didn't go alone. We brought 2 trucks and 2 trailers so we could load up fast. We didn't linger. We didn't talk about memories. We didn't look around one last time. We grabbed our belongings and left, and we never went back. That experience changed me. It flipped something inside my head. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't just someone who had strange experiences as a kid. I was someone who had seen something undeniable, something violent and intelligent enough to scare us out of our home. Over the last 30 years, it pushed me to learn everything I could about the paranormal. I've spent a big part of my life trying to help other people who feel trapped in haunted places, trying to give them answers, or at least comfort, or at least the feeling that they're not alone and not crazy. I've been through war. I've had a rough life in different ways. I've seen things that should have been the worst memories I carried. But nothing has ever scared me like that night in that trailer. And even now, even after all these years, even after all the investigations and all the stories, I will not go back to that property. Not for any reason. Not for money. Not out of curiosity. Not even to prove a point. Some places don't want you there. And once you've felt that for real, you don't forget it. Story 3. I don't even remember how I got the job. I barely remember the posting. I just remember the few details that mattered to me at the time. Small motel, rural, free accommodation. Back then, I still lived with my mom, and I was desperate to get out. I didn't care if the place was boring. I didn't care if it was far. I just wanted something that was mine, even if it was some tiny room in the middle of nowhere. When I called the number in the listing, a man answered in a low, stern voice. He didn't ask much. No long interview. No tell me about yourself. He mostly asked when I could start. That was it. Immediately, I said, trying to sound confident. There was this small jump in his tone, like I'd surprised him. Good, he said. You've got the job. It felt too easy. So easy that when I hung up, I sat there staring at my phone, waiting for the panic to kick in. It didn't. All I felt was relief. I told my mom I'd found work, packed what I could into my car, and left before she could talk me into staying. Getting there took longer than I expected. You had to take an exit off the highway and then drive down an old forest road that looked like it hadn't been properly paved since the 80s. The trees pressed in close on both sides, and my headlights caught wet leaves and uneven patches of broken asphalt. The farther I drove, the more certain I became that I was being set up. A fake job. A scam. Something that would end with my car abandoned in the woods. But then, I reached the address, and the motel was there. It was small, one floor, made of concrete, and painted a dark gray that blended into the trees. The windows were narrow and set high, like someone designed the building to keep the inside hidden. There was a tiny parking lot with space for maybe 4 cars. No neon sign. No big name out front. No vacancy light. If you didn't already know it was there, you'd never guess it was a motel. It looked more like a storage building or some kind of utility site. There was a natural reserve nearby, which made me think maybe hikers and hunters used it as a quiet place to crash. Maybe that was the whole point. People who wanted to disappear for a night without being seen. Standing outside was the owner. He was a large man in his 50s, with balding brown hair and a heavy build that made his button-up shirt look tight. Gray shirt, black pants, no jacket even though the air was cold. His face wasn't friendly, exactly, but it wasn't cruel either. Just firm, like he didn't have time to waste. He greeted me with the same low, stern voice I'd heard on the phone and walked me inside. The place smelled old, not rotten, not filthy. Just that stale, trapped smell of closed blinds, old carpet, and cleaning chemicals that never really leave. The reception area was small. A desk, a phone, a little TV, a key rack, and a guest book. He gave me the quick tour. There wasn't much to learn because there wasn't much to the place. A short hallway, a row of rooms, a couple utility closets, a back door. My job would be basic. Clean the rooms, keep the place tidy, answer calls, check guests in and out, take payments. The last place he showed me was my room. It had the same stained carpet and musty blinds as the others, but the sheets at least looked newer. The room wasn't nice, but it was mine. Free accommodation was a big deal when you were trying to escape your childhood bedroom. I set my bag down and looked around. Will I be the only one working here? I asked. Yes, he said, like it was obvious. But don't worry, the season hasn't started. There will be barely any guests. I'll get you a helping hand once the season kicks off. For now, you can manage it yourself. I nodded. But it wasn't the work that worried me. It was the emptiness. A place like this with no guests, no coworkers, no friends nearby, it sounded like a recipe for going slowly insane. You got everything? He asked. I think so. Great, he said. You know where my number is. If you need anything, call me. I live an hour away and can be here fast. Then he paused, and his eyes narrowed slightly as if he was deciding how hard to press a point. We really value personal privacy here, he said, so keep that in your head. The way he said it made my face react before I could stop it. I didn't even realize I'd made a look until he furrowed his brows and stared right into my eyes. I really do mean it, he said, slower now. Respect their privacy. Yeah, I said quickly. I will. Good. He smiled for the first time, but it didn't make him look warm. It made him look satisfied. He shook my hand, firm grip, and walked away. His steps echoed down the hall. A minute later, I heard his car start. The headlights swept across the windows, then faded. The parking lot went dark again. For the next few days, nothing happened. I mostly sat at the reception desk and watched TV. I flipped through channels, ate vending machine snacks I'd brought with me, and listened to the building settle. I read the same magazines twice. I cleaned things that were already clean. I walked outside and stared at the trees like they might provide entertainment. The bell above the front door didn't ring once. On Friday evening, I was half asleep in the chair, remote slipping in my hand, when the bell rang. It startled me so badly I almost fell out of the seat. My hands flew over the desk, searching for the guest book like it was going to disappear. I finally found it under a stack of papers and opened it to the blank page, trying to look professional even though my heart was still racing. The person stepped closer while I fumbled. He was around 30, pale-faced, with dark eyes that didn't seem to catch much light. He wore a long brown coat, a hat, and gloves. It was cold outside, sure, but he still looked overdressed, like he was dressed for a winter storm instead of a chilly fall night. "One room," he said. His voice was flat. Not rude, not friendly, just empty. "Sure," I said. "That'll be $40. Please sign in." He leaned over the guest book and scribbled something. Name and signature, if you could call it that. His handwriting was so messy it looked like he was trying to write without letting the pen touch the paper. I turned to the key rack and pulled one down. "If possible," he said, "may I get room number 7? My hand paused midair. Room 7 was the one at the end of the hall, tucked farthest from reception. Technically, it didn't matter. Every room was the same. But something about the way he asked for that specific number made my skin tighten. Sure, I said. "Thank you," he replied, and took the key from my hand. Only after he walked away did I notice the suitcase. It was huge, the kind of thing you'd take for an extended trip. It looked heavy, too. He carried it like it mattered, like he was careful with it. After the door to the hallway shut behind him, I opened the guest book again to read what he wrote. I couldn't make it out. The next morning, I woke up early, right at sunrise. The light outside was cold and gray, and for a second I forgot where I was. Then I remembered, and the motel's silence settled back onto me like a blanket. I walked to reception. The key to room 7 was already on the desk. So was the guest book, open, with a checkout time written in. He hadn't even waited for me to be there. Just left the key like it was normal. It felt rude, but at the same time, I couldn't deny it made my life easier. No small talk, no awkward goodbyes, no extra steps. I grabbed my cleaning supplies and headed down the hall. The smell hit me before I even reached the doorway. It was like someone had emptied a whole bottle of air freshener in the room. Not a pleasant, clean smell, either. It was strong, chemical sweet, the kind that makes your throat itch. I started coughing and pulled my shirt up over my nose. When I stepped inside, I stopped. The room was spotless, not motel clean. Spotless, like nobody had been there at all. The sheets were untouched. The bathroom looked unused. No towels on the floor. No trash. No hair in the sink. Nothing. I rolled up the blinds, expecting to see dust on the windowsill or some sign of life. But there wasn't even that. It was like the man had paid $40 to sit in a clean room and breathe air freshener all night. I cleaned anyway, because that was my job, but it felt ridiculous. I changed the sheets and wiped down surfaces that were already clean, then left the room and tried to convince myself it wasn't weird. The days after that were the same as before. I watched TV. I swept leaves outside. The trees were shedding fast, and the wind kept piling them against the building. That at least gave me something to do. Still, no one else came. I knew hiking season was fading, but the emptiness felt unnatural. Like the road itself didn't want people to find the place. Like the motel existed only for the forest and whatever lived inside it. I started catching myself talking out loud. Not full conversations, but little comments, noises, random words. Anything to break the silence. The next Friday evening, the bell rang again. When I saw the brown coat, I honestly didn't believe it at first. It was like seeing the same person in a dream twice and realizing you didn't imagine them. "Good evening," he said. "Evening," I replied. "Back again?" I asked, forcing a smile. He looked at me from under the brim of his hat. His eyes were fixed on mine in a way that made the smile on my face feel wrong. I swallowed and turned slightly, pretending to look for the guest book, even though it was right there. "Room number 7? I said. "Yes," he answered, quiet and low. When I turned fully back, he was already writing in the book. The same scribble, the same useless signature. And again, the large suitcase. That morning, just like before, the key was waiting on the desk. Checkout time written in. No goodbye. I went to clean, already bracing myself for the air freshener smell. It was there, strong and sharp, like the room had been sprayed minutes ago. And again, it looked spotless, until I rolled up the blinds. On the carpet near the window were a few drops of something. Not a lot. Just enough to catch my flashlight when I angled it down. The color wasn't obvious in the dim light, but it looked darker than water. I knelt with my sponge and scrubbed. Nothing. The stain didn't lift. It didn't fade. It sank deeper, spreading slightly into the carpet, like it was being absorbed. "Jesus," I whispered to myself. "What is this?" I scrubbed harder and made it worse. The carpet in that room was already old and stained, so part of me told myself it didn't matter. But it bothered me anyway. I wiped sweat off my forehead, changed the sheets like I was supposed to, and went back to reception with the smell of chemicals still in my nose. Days passed. TV, leaves, boredom. On Wednesday, the phone rang. The sound of it felt shocking after so much silence. I jumped up, excited just to hear another voice. "Hello," I said. The owner's low, stern voice came through. "Good evening. How have the past 2 weeks been? Is the work too much?" "No," I said quickly. "We only had one guest over the past 2 weeks." "Oh, yes," he said. "I expected that. Season's over. Fewer people." "He's actually been here twice," I said. "The same man. Has he been here before?" Tall, brown coat, hat, gloves. The line went silent. Not dead silent like the call dropped. The owner was still there, breathing, thinking. Then he spoke again, colder. "What have we said about respecting privacy?" My stomach tightened. "Yes, I know." I didn't ask him anything. I was just wondering. Another pause. "Yes," he finally said. "He's been here before. Quiet. Good guest. We don't get many like him this time of year. Don't bother him. He doesn't like it when people are nosy." "Yes," I said, more carefully now. "Of course. Good. If you need anything else, call me." He hung up. I stood there with the phone still in my hand. My eyes drifted to the key rack. Room 7's key hung there, dull metal catching a bit of light. It shouldn't have meant anything. It was just a number. Just a room. But I couldn't stop staring at it. By Friday evening, I had the key ready on the desk before the bell even rang. I didn't even turn off the TV when he walked in. I just picked up the key and the guest book like we'd been doing this for years. He greeted me in that same cold, flat tone. I slid the book toward him. He signed. He left the money on the table. No hesitation, no conversation. Then he disappeared down the hall with his suitcase. That night, a movie came on that grabbed me. I got stuck watching it, completely absorbed. I'd closed the reception door hours ago, but I stayed out there anyway, sitting alone under the fluorescent light, letting the sound of the movie fill the silence. It was around 1 a.m. when I heard something that didn't belong. At first, I thought it was from the TV, some weird sound effect. I reached for the remote and turned the volume down. The sound didn't fade. It got louder. I turned the TV all the way off and sat there, staring into the dim reception area, listening. It sounded like someone pushing their fingers into wet dirt, that soft, ugly squelch. Then an irregular crackling, like something rubbery tearing in slow, uneven snaps. I got up, my mouth dry, and walked toward the hall. The sound was coming from the far end, from room 7. I stood there for a second, my brain trying to talk me out of it. People do weird things in motel rooms. Maybe he brought food. Maybe he spilled something. Maybe he was fixing something in his suitcase. Then I heard it again, the wet digging sound, followed by that crackle, closer now, sharper, like it was right on the other side of the door. I swallowed and took a step forward, then stopped. I walked back to reception, turned the TV on again like the noise could be drowned out by pretending it wasn't happening, and went back to my room. I considered calling the owner, but I could already picture his face and hear his voice. I'd have to admit I listened. That I walked down the hall. That I paid attention to a guest. And I needed this job. I needed the money and the distance from home. The last thing I wanted was to get fired and end up back in my mom's house with my tail between my legs. In the morning, the key was on the desk like always. Checkout time written in. Except this time, the air freshener smell was so strong, it reached the reception. It was in the hallway. It was in my throat. I took my supplies and went to clean. The stains were everywhere now. All over the carpet, spread out in little blotches and smears, like something had dripped and been dragged. I scrubbed until my hands hurt. The stains didn't come out. Over the next few days, I tried to distract myself with TV and chores, but my mind kept pulling me back to the sounds. Every quiet moment felt like it was waiting for them to return. That wet digging, that rubbery crackle. The way it stopped instantly when the floor creaked, like whatever was making it could hear everything. When Friday came, I felt sick hours before he arrived. I kept checking the clock, kept glancing at the door, like my body already knew what my brain was still trying to deny. The bell rang at the usual time. He stood there in the brown coat, hat, and gloves, but something about him looked off. His face seemed slimmer than before, his cheeks more hollow. His skin looked tighter, like it was being pulled back. The same eyes stared out from under the hat, dark and flat. I had to grip the edge of the desk to stop myself from asking him what he was doing in that room, what he was bringing in that suitcase, why the carpet kept getting stained, why the air smelled like chemicals strong enough to burn. But I didn't say anything. I handed him the key to room 7. He signed the guest book with that same unreadable scribble. He left the money. And he walked away. Not even an hour later, the noises came back. This time, they were louder. The digging and crackling weren't faint, half-imagined sounds anymore. They filled the hallway like the walls were carrying them. Even when I turned the TV volume all the way up, it didn't cover them. I sat at the desk, trying to keep my hands busy, fiddling with pens, tapping my fingers, staring into the dark hallway like I could force myself to see something normal. Then I noticed the smell. Not the air freshener this time. Something musty, thick and warm like damp fabric left in a closed space. It rolled down the hall in waves, mixing with the chemical sweetness until it made me feel dizzy. "What the hell?" I whispered. I got out of the chair and started walking toward the hallway. The noise and smell grew stronger with each step. My heartbeat felt loud in my ears. The fluorescent light behind me seemed weak, like it didn't want to follow. When I reached the corner and peeked around it, I froze. Room 7's door was open. Not wide open, just a little, just enough. A thin slice of darkness waited inside. I stood there, staring. I looked down the hall, even though I knew there wasn't anyone else. No other guests, no staff. Just me and him. Just me and whatever he was doing behind that door. I moved forward slowly, placing each foot carefully, trying not to make the floor creak. The motel felt different right then, like it was holding its breath. There was a strange warmth coming from the room, faint but real, like standing near a heater that wasn't visible. The owner's words played in my head, respect their privacy. But the door was right there, open, like it wanted me to look, like it was bait. I stepped closer and peered inside. At first, I only saw shadows in the edge of the bed. Then I saw movement on the floor, a shifting shape near the suitcase, something that didn't fit in my brain as a normal object, something inside that case that I still don't have a name for. Before I could stop myself, a gasp escaped my mouth. Immediately, the sound stopped. The room went quiet. Then the man turned. He looked straight at me, and for one long second, we stared at each other. Then, his face twisted. He made a sound that was half screech and half laugh, and he smiled, wide, unnatural, like the skin around his mouth didn't stretch the way it should. And then, he started crawling toward the door. Not crawling like a person on hands and knees, crawling like something that was used to moving low, used to pulling itself forward fast and wrong. I stumbled backward, unable to look away. His eyes held mine like hooks. He reached the doorframe and grabbed it, and in one smooth motion he pulled himself upright, like his bones didn't work the same way mine did. That snapped something inside me. I turned and ran. My feet slammed down the hallway. Behind me, I heard his steps. But they weren't rushed. They were slow, measured, like he knew he didn't need to hurry. I hit the corner, nearly slid, then shoved the glass front door open so hard it bounced against the frame. Cold air slapped my face. I ran to my car, hands already digging into my pockets. My keys were deep in there, too deep. My fingers were shaking so badly I couldn't get a grip. When I finally pulled them out, I dropped them. They fell behind the driver's seat. I made this broken sound in my throat, pure panic, and threw myself into the car, reaching back blindly until I felt the keys. I grabbed them, jammed them into the ignition, and started the engine with my whole hand. I floored it. The tires spit gravel. The car lurched forward and tore out of the lot, bouncing over the uneven road like it wanted to shake itself apart. In the rearview mirror, I saw him. He reached the spot where my car had been, then stopped. He didn't chase. He just stood there, still and straight, watching me leave like it was nothing. Like he'd done this before. Like he knew I'd come back eventually. Because people always came back to the things they didn't understand. The drive was a blur. Trees, darkness, the narrow road, my own breathing loud in my ears. I don't remember most of it. I only remember the feeling of trying to outrun the image of his smile. I didn't stop until I saw lights and an open gas station. I pulled in too fast, parked crooked, and stumbled inside like my legs were forgetting how to work. I found a small table and sat down hard. The attendant looked up from behind the counter. "You okay?" he asked, already stepping closer. I tried to answer, but my mouth didn't work right. What came out sounded like nonsense. Pieces of words, breath, panic. He didn't push me. He just nodded like he'd seen people in shock before. A minute later, he came back with a coffee and a hot dog and set them down in front of me. I wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. The heat helped a little. My fingers were still trembling, but at least I could feel something normal. I stared out the window at the dark tree line beyond the gas station lights, half expecting to see a brown coat and a hat standing at the edge of the woods. The attendant sat across from me. He opened his mouth like he was going to ask again what happened, maybe in a softer way. Before he could, the phone behind the counter rang. "Sorry," he said, standing up and walking away. I watched him pick it up, listened to him say hello, listened to his tone change as he heard whoever was on the other end. Then he covered the receiver and looked at me. "Are you Mr. Blank?" he asked. "A motel owner is asking for you." My stomach went cold again. Because the owner lived an hour away, and I never told him I was leaving. Story 4. When I was a kid, I used to run away the way kids do it when they want to feel dramatic, but don't really understand what leaving means. I'd pack a backpack with the essentials my child brain could imagine. A blanket, a pillow, a stuffed animal or two, and a box of animal crackers. Then I'd walk right past my mom like I was starring in a movie, making sure she could see how serious I was. I'd march down to the end of our street, stick my thumb out like I'd seen on TV, and stand there waiting for a car to pull over and carry me into some new life. And then, 5 minutes later, I'd get bored, or hungry, or cold. I'd turn around, walk back home, and act like nothing had happened. I did it so many times that it became a routine. I even got picked up once, which sounds bad until I explain it. It wasn't a stranger. It was my coach from whatever sport I was playing back then, and he just drove me in a big loop and dropped me back at my house without making a big deal out of it. Like he'd dealt with kids like me before. Like he knew I didn't really want to disappear. I just wanted someone to notice how badly I wanted to leave. Back then, I thought I wanted to run away from my house, from my parents, from the small, miserable town I lived in. I didn't realize I would ever actually follow through. I didn't realize it would take 23 years for me to stop pretending. But at 4:00 this morning, I did it for real. I walked out. I ran away like a kid, which is fitting, because even as a grown man, I'm still the most childish person I know. And I say that as someone who literally has 3 brothers in elementary school. I don't even know whether to use past tense there. Saying it feels wrong, because as far as I know, they're still alive, still healthy, still in that house, still my brothers, even if I'm writing this like someone who might never see them again. I've had severe AD my entire life. I'm not using that as an excuse, just as a fact that explains the shape of my personality. As a kid, I threw big tantrums, not even because I wanted something specific, but because I felt bored and restless and full of electricity. I couldn't focus in school. I couldn't focus on anything. Teachers thought I wasn't trying, but it wasn't that. It felt more like my mind was a room full of TVs and someone kept changing the channels. Eventually, it got bad enough that my parents pulled me out of public school and switched me to homeschooling when I was a junior. I didn't really mind. Public school had never been good for me anyway. I didn't have friends there. I was the kid who ate lunch alone at the corner table, the kid who didn't fit into any group, the kid who watched all the cliques and stereotypes form around him like a weather pattern and never found a place in any of them. I was living proof that you can be surrounded by people every day and still feel completely separate from the world. So yeah, my childhood had a theme, wanting to escape. The difference was childhood escape is theater. Adulthood escape is a decision you can't take back. Living with your parents at 23 is exactly as bad as it sounds, at least when you live in the same room where you used to play with toys. I always felt like my parents resented me for something they never said out loud, like there was this invisible charge in the air whenever we were in the same room. It only got worse when I decided not to go to college. I didn't even apply. They acted like they supported me. They said the right things. They did the polite parent version of encouragement. But I could tell it wasn't real. Not fully. It was more like they were waiting for me to become someone else and didn't know what to do with the fact that I kept not changing. 5 years went by like that. Me in my childhood home, drifting through days, feeling watched and judged even when nobody said anything, feeling like a burden even when nobody used the word. Then last night, something snapped. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was just the quiet knowledge that nothing would ever improve if I stayed where I was. Either way, I left in the middle of the night. I didn't have some master plan. I didn't have money or a place to go. I just walked out with the kind of urgency you get when staying feels unbearable. I found myself heading toward the edge of town, toward the Greyhound bus stop. Here's the weird part. I sat down under that little shelter and waited, and while I was waiting, I had this sudden thought. I can't remember ever seeing this bus stop before in my life. Not once. Not as a kid. Not as a teenager. Not even as an adult driving around. And I grew up here. I know every street, every empty lot, every gas station, every place where kids hang out to do dumb things. But the bus stop felt like it had been placed there for the first time the moment I needed it. I remember thinking that, and then brushing it off, because my brain does that. It loves making patterns out of nothing. Still, I can't ignore it now. Not after what I've seen since then. It feels like it makes sense in a way I don't like. The bus showed up. I didn't even know for sure one would. That's how little thought I'd put into it. I just sat there in the dark and trusted that something would happen, because I didn't know what else to do. When it pulled up, I checked the time. 4:46 a.m. I got on, and the bus was empty except for the driver. He looked middle-aged at first glance, maybe late 30s or early 40s, but there were small gray streaks in his hair that made him look older in a strange, uneven way. Not aging gray, more like someone had painted it in. His face had that look people describe as wise, like he'd seen too much for the age he appeared to be. He was dressed all in black, a plain black t-shirt, a black jacket zipped halfway, black jeans. And this is going to sound like the dumbest detail to focus on, but his jeans fit too perfectly. Not tight, not baggy, not tailored like a fashion guy, just perfect. Like the fabric had been poured onto him. Like clothing wasn't something he wore, it was part of the shape he chose. I didn't see his shoes, but I assumed they were black too. Everything about him felt coordinated, like a uniform pretending to be casual. He had a smile that was wide in a friendly way, but it made me uneasy anyway. Not because it was huge and creepy, not like a horror movie. It was worse than that. It was a normal-looking smile that didn't feel connected to anything behind it. He nodded at me. "Enjoy your ride, sir," he said. His voice was scratchy, like he'd been up all night, but it also had this weird energy in it. Cheerful in a way that felt forced, like a radio host at 4 and trying too hard to sound awake. I took a seat around the middle of the bus. I turned on my phone, more out of habit than because I had anything to do on it. I checked Snapchat. Nothing. I checked Reddit. Nothing. I scrolled Instagram until my brain went numb. After a while, I set my phone down and sat in silence, listening to the hum of the road and the empty rattle sound a big vehicle makes when it isn't carrying anyone. That's when the driver spoke again, loud enough that I almost jumped. "I was waiting for you to get off that damn thing so we could talk," he said, laughing lightly like we were buddies. "How's your ride going, sir?" I pride myself on having the best possible service for my passengers. They always get off my bus with big smiles on their faces. Something about the way he said it made me shiver. Maybe it was too enthusiastic. Maybe it was how he emphasized passengers, like the word meant more than it should. "Is that so?" I said, not really inviting more conversation. "Yep," he replied. Truer than night, I'd never heard that expression before. It wasn't even the fact that it was unfamiliar. It was the way he said it like it was ancient and obvious, like it came from somewhere that wasn't here. For the next half hour, he was quiet. I stared out the window at darkness, watching occasional lights smear past. I kept telling myself I was just tired and anxious, and my brain was making normal things feel wrong. Then he spoke again. "Where are you from, sir?" "Just underscore, 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 underscore," I said, naming the town where he'd picked me up. "Where you got me." And then, for some reason I still can't explain, I asked him back. "Where are you from?" The air changed. Not literally, but the feeling did. There was a pause, and it felt like I'd broken a rule I hadn't known existed, like I'd asked a question that wasn't meant for me. I started to regret it immediately. He chuckled, softer now. "Not from around here," he said, and his voice wasn't bright anymore. "I come from a place you ain't never been," he added. I don't know why, but I tried to play along. Maybe because it was easier than admitting I was uncomfortable. "Oh yeah?" I said, forcing a little humor. "Try me." His tone went completely serious. "The underworld," he said. I let out a small laugh, because that's what you do when someone says something like that, and you don't want to acknowledge how strange it feels. Then he said, "No, I'm serious." And the scratchy cheerfulness was gone. The voice that replaced it was low and flat and cold in a way that made my stomach tighten. "You know those things you people call demons?" he said. "I'm one of them. I remember this exact moment because my brain did something I didn't think it could do. It held two beliefs at once. I was completely sure he was kidding. And I believed him anyway. It was the strangest sensation, like my mind couldn't decide which reality to live in, and just sat between them, trembling. Then, like a switch flipped back, he laughed. "I'm just messing with you, kid," he said, and suddenly his voice sounded shrill compared to the darkness from a moment before. Too bright, too fast. I laughed too, but it came out nervous and thin. I didn't fully believe the joke. And that's when it happened. My body went limp. Not like I chose to relax. Not like I slumped from exhaustion. More like someone had cut the connection between my brain and my muscles. My arms felt heavy and useless. My legs stopped responding. I tried to move and couldn't. Panic surged, but even my panic felt muted, like I was underwater. The driver started laughing. Not a friendly laugh. A loud, shaking, manic laugh that filled the empty bus like a siren. He stood up from his seat, and the bus kept driving, straight down the road, steady, smooth, like invisible hands were holding the wheel. My vision started flickering in and out, like a broken TV. Darkness, headlights, darkness, the faint shape of his shoulders ahead. Darkness again. I tried to keep my eyes open. I tried to force my fingers to move. I tried to scream. I couldn't do any of it. I lost consciousness fast, like my brain just shut off because it didn't have another option. And then I woke up in my bed, in my room, in my parents' house, screaming so loud my throat hurt. My door flew open. Both my parents rushed in, half asleep, fear on their faces. "What's wrong, James?" my mom said. I was drenched in sweat, shaking, trying to catch my breath. My heart felt like it was trying to tear its way out of my chest. I stared at them, at my posters, at my familiar walls, and for a few seconds, I didn't know which reality I was in. The bus, the driver, the empty highway, the laugh. Then my breathing slowed enough for me to understand. None of it had happened. It was a dream. I'm sorry. I know that's annoying. I know it feels like I led you somewhere and dropped you at the end. But the truth is, that's exactly what it felt like to me, too. Like something led me right up to a door and then slammed it in my face. And if you're wondering why I'm even writing it down, it's because I woke up with a kind of fear that doesn't belong to a normal dream. The kind that sticks to you all day. The kind that makes you look at your own front door like it might open on its own. I wanted to run away again after I woke up. For real this time. I actually got dressed and stood in my room with my phone in my hand, staring at the clock, thinking about the bus stop like it was waiting for me. And the part that scares me the most is that even knowing it was a dream, I still can't shake the feeling that the driver wasn't lying, that he was only practicing the conversation, that he was only warming me up, and that one day soon, when I finally do walk out at 4 a.m., the bus is going to be there like it always was, like it's been there the whole time. Waiting. Story 5. We live near a fairly large woodland, the kind that starts right at the edge of the neighborhood and stretches far enough back that, once you're inside it, the world feels separate. During the day, it's just trees, trails, birds, and the occasional dog walker. At night, it's different. The dark settles in fast under the branches, and the woods don't feel empty so much as they feel occupied, like they're holding their breath. About 3 years ago, my friend and I built a shack back there. Calling it a shack might be generous. It was more like a scrappy little hideout made from whatever wood we could drag and nail together. But it had walls, a rough roof, and just enough space for 2 people to sit and feel like we'd made something secret. We put it deep, in the woods, in a spot that wasn't near the main paths. It wasn't somewhere a random person would stumble into unless they were really looking. That was the point. At the time, we were younger and convinced we'd found our own little corner of the world. We didn't go there to vandalize anything or mess around with other people. We went there because it felt like ours. We could sit in the dark and talk about nothing. We could play music quietly. We could do that thing teenagers do where you just exist somewhere away from parents and street lights and responsibilities, and for a while it feels like freedom. The first night we really used it, it was late, around 11 p.m., maybe a little after. The kind of time when the normal woods traffic is long gone. In our area, dog walkers are usually done before 9 p.m., and most people in the neighborhood are older. They're not the type to take a late stroll into the trees. The younger people around here don't really hang out in the woods either. They might meet up on streets, in parks, closer to houses, or somewhere you can easily leave if things get weird. But our shack wasn't in any of those places. It was tucked away in a part of the woods that nobody had any reason to go to at night. That night, we were just sitting in there, chilling. We had music playing on a phone, not loud enough to carry far, but enough to fill the silence. An Ozzy Osbourne song came on. I can't remember which one for sure, probably Crazy Train, but it might have been another. Either way, it was one of those songs where you want to sing along even if you absolutely shouldn't. And we did. Badly. We weren't singing in any serious way. We were joking around, trying to mimic the vocals, but failing so hard it didn't even count as singing anymore. It was basically us half moaning the lyrics, dragging out sounds, trying to do that dramatic rock voice and turning it into something stupid. We knew we sounded ridiculous, and that made it funnier. We were laughing through it, leaning into how bad it was. The woods around us were quiet. No wind, no rustling leaves, no distant cars. The kind of stillness where you can hear your own breathing if you stop talking. Then, right outside the shack, we heard it. A voice. Not a fox, not an owl, not the weird creak of trees or some random animal moving through brush. It sounded like a person. It was deeper than either of us, low and rough, with this raspy edge to it. And it wasn't just a voice in the distance, like someone calling out from far away. It sounded close, like it was standing just outside the wall of our little shack, and it mimicked us. For maybe 3 seconds, no longer than that, it copied the same kind of noise we were making. Not clear words, not a sentence, but that strange, moaning, groaning version of singing we'd been doing. Like it heard us and decided to answer in the same style. It wasn't playful. It wasn't someone laughing or saying, "shut up," or anything that would make sense. It was just one weird, deep groan that matched what we were doing enough to feel intentional. The second it happened, we froze. Not the exaggerated, we paused for a second kind of freeze. I mean, everything stopped. The air in my chest locked up. My friend didn't move. Neither of us even turned our heads, because suddenly it felt like if we moved, whatever was out there would know exactly where we were looking. We switched the lights off immediately. The inside of the shack went pitch black, the kind of dark where you can't even see your own hands. We sat there and listened, hoping to hear something that would make it make sense. Footsteps, maybe. Someone running away, if it was a stupid prank. A laugh, even, if somebody had somehow followed us and decided to mess with us. Anything that would confirm it was human and normal. But there was nothing. No footsteps. No leaves crunching. No sticks snapping. No movement around the shack at all. The voice had happened, and then the woods went dead silent again. That silence was worse than the sound. Because if it was a person standing out there, why weren't they moving? Why weren't they walking away? Why didn't we hear them breathing, shifting their weight, stepping on something? Even in a quiet forest, you should hear something. But we didn't. We sat there for what felt like a long time, not talking, barely breathing, listening so hard it made my ears ache. The quiet had a weight to it. Even the usual background noise you expect in the woods, wind through branches, insects, felt like it had shut off. Eventually, we got tired of being trapped in our own little box of fear. The longer we stayed inside, the more our imaginations filled in the blanks. So, we did what seemed impossible. 5 minutes earlier, we got up and went outside. We stepped out slowly, half expecting something to be right there in front of us. We looked around the shack, shining our phone lights into the trees, sweeping the beam across trunks and bushes, checking the ground for any sign of movement. We called out, not loudly, but enough to say, "Hello?" in a way that was meant to sound confident. Nothing answered. There was nobody there. No person standing between the trees. No shape moving away. No sudden rush of footsteps. Not even the feeling of someone nearby that you sometimes get when you can't see clearly. Just empty woods and our own lights cutting into the dark. We checked around longer than we needed to, because part of us wanted proof. But we didn't find anything. Eventually, we decided to leave. The fun mood was gone. The music didn't matter anymore. We walked back out of the forest like our little music debut had ended in the worst possible way. For a while after that, we didn't really talk about it much. Not because we forgot, but because we didn't have an explanation that didn't sound crazy. We joke about it sometimes, but it was the kind of joke that doesn't fully cover the discomfort underneath. Years passed. The memory stayed, but it dulled around the edges, until something else happened that brought it right back. A few weeks ago, my mom called me when she was walking back toward our house. To get home, you have to walk past the front edge of the woods and then up a path that leads to our street. It's not like you have to go deep into the trees, just close enough that you can see the line where the forest starts. She sounded unsettled on the phone. Not annoyed, not angry, frightened. She told me that as she was walking past, she heard what sounded like someone shouting from inside the woods. Not an animal call, not a weird echo. It sounded human to her. A person's voice raised loud enough to carry, coming from under the trees. And the part that made her really scared was the way it seemed to be getting closer. Not like it was following her on the path, exactly, but like the sound was moving through the woods in her direction. Like whoever or whatever was making the noise wasn't staying in one spot. As soon as I heard her describe it, something in me went cold, because my mind jumped straight back to that night in the shack. The deep, raspy imitation. The silence afterward. The feeling that the woods had listened to us. I was out with my friends at the time, just driving around. When I told them what my mom had said, we all made the same decision without really discussing it. We drove back down to the area she described to see if we could find anything, anyone. Part of me wanted a normal explanation so badly it almost hurt. We got there quickly, but just like before, there was nothing. No person, no shouting, no movement. Just the woods and the edge of the neighborhood, and a feeling like we were late to something we weren't supposed to see. Later, I tried to be rational about it. I told myself it could have been a fox. Foxes scream at night. If you've never heard it before, it can sound terrifying and strangely human. I've heard people describe it as sounding like a woman yelling, and it can make your blood run cold if it catches you off guard. So I suggested that to my mom. She shut it down immediately. She said no. She said it wasn't that. She said it sounded like a human voice, like someone actually shouting, and she couldn't explain the way it seemed to be moving closer. That was when I remembered the shack incident in full detail, not as a vague, creepy memory, but as a clear moment. The same woods, the same feeling, the same problem, sound without a source. And then I found out it wasn't just my mom and me. My sister had a similar experience. She sometimes used the woods as a shortcut, just a quick way to get somewhere without taking the long route around. One day, she was walking on the trail and heard shouting ahead of her. Not behind her, not far away. In front of her, on the path. It freaked her out so badly she turned around almost immediately and went back the way she came, canceling whatever plans she had. She told me later that it didn't feel like someone calling out normally. It felt wrong, like the sound didn't match the space. At that point, it stopped feeling like a one-off weird night from years ago. It started feeling like a pattern. And now, every time I'm in those woods, even in the daytime, I get this feeling that I'm being watched. It's not constant. It comes in waves. I'll be walking and everything will feel normal, and then suddenly I'll get the urge to look over my shoulder, or I'll feel my skin tighten like I'm being observed from somewhere. I can't see. I know how that sounds. I know it could just be my brain connecting unrelated events and turning them into a story. But the feeling is real enough that it changes how I move. I don't linger. I don't wear headphones. I don't joke around loudly anymore, not like I used to. I keep my eyes scanning without meaning to, especially when the light starts to fade. There's also one more detail that always comes up when people talk about those woods. When we first moved into the area, I was told there were stories about a weird middle-aged man who used to jump out at people in the woods for no reason, just to scare them, like he got something out of it. That would be an easy explanation. A local creep who thought it was funny. But I don't really believe that's what this is. If the story was true back then, that guy would be old now. And even if he wasn't, the timing doesn't fit. The places don't fit. The way the sound behaved doesn't fit. A person hiding in the woods would still make noise. They'd step on something. They'd breathe. They'd move away when they realized they'd been noticed. They wouldn't mimic two teenagers for 3 seconds and then vanish into perfect silence like the forest had swallowed them. If it really was some dedicated old guy still out there trying to scare people decades later, honestly, I think I'd be less scared and more impressed by the commitment. But deep down, that's not what frightens me. What frightens me is that whatever made that voice that night seemed to understand what we were doing. It didn't shout random words. It didn't make a normal animal sound. It copied us, like it was practicing, like it was trying on our noise the way someone might try on a mask. And what frightens me even more is that the woods have kept doing it, in different ways to different people in my family, years apart. I don't know what it is. I don't have a clean ending or a brave explanation. All I have is the memory of that deep, rasping groan right outside the shack, the silence afterward, and the way the shouting my mum and sister heard sounded human, but never came, with a person you could actually find. Maybe there's a normal reason. Maybe there isn't. All I know is that the next time I hear something in those woods that sounds like someone imitating a human voice, I'm not going to stand there trying to prove I'm not scared. I'm going to leave, and I'm going to leave fast, because there's something about a voice you can't place that makes you realize how helpless you are in the dark between the trees. Story 6. There's nothing for me to do in here, and I can feel myself unraveling. I can't face Rebecca, and these smug doctors couldn't tell their backsides from their elbows. They look at me like I'm an old woman who's confused, and maybe that's easier for them than accepting anything else. One of the nurses suggested I write things down. I doubt she meant posting it online, and definitely not on the same website George used to use to share pictures of his roses and his tomato plants. But I don't see the harm now. If nothing else, I want a record outside these walls. Something that isn't filtered through police reports and medical notes and my daughter's disgust. It started a few days ago. I keep replaying it, thinking about all the little moments where my gut told me something wasn't right. I wish I'd listened to that feeling. I don't think I could have saved George, not really. But maybe I could have saved myself from the way it all happened. Maybe I wouldn't be sitting here now, being spoken to like a child. George and I were married for nearly 40 years. It wasn't some perfect story, not even close. He could be stubborn enough to make your teeth ache. He had that way about him where once he decided something, there was no shifting him. And then there was his work. His work changed him. I always knew it did. He never talked much about it, which was typical of his generation and his sort, but you can tell when someone carries weight on their soul. It shows in the way they go quiet in the middle of a sentence. It shows in the way they look through you sometimes, like they've gone somewhere else and left their eyes behind. I struggled too. Rebecca was mostly raised by me. George would be away for years at a time, with leave that came and went like a rumor. I lived with that constant low fear that the next knock at the door would be uniforms and bad news, and I'd be handed a folded flag and told to be brave about it. That's what people say when they want you to swallow grief politely. But everything changed when he retired, nearly a decade ago. It was like we finally got to be ordinary. We moved out to a beautiful little house with a few acres of land. When we first bought it, the property was overgrown, almost wild. Brambles, thick weeds, little trees that had sprung up wherever they pleased. It looked like it had been left to the world for years. George loved it. He could never stand being idle. Even on holiday, he'd find something to fix, something to carry, something to improve. So he threw himself into the land the way he threw himself into everything. Completely. I used to watch from the kitchen window while he worked. Over months, the overgrown woods became his private paradise. He brought in apple trees and planted them in neat, hopeful rows. He dug beds for tulips and rose bushes, and little patches of wildflowers that he insisted were for the butterflies. He said it like he was doing them a favor, like the butterflies were his guests, and he wanted to make them comfortable. Then he built his shed. I told him it looked awful. I didn't sugarcoat it. It was a big, clumsy wooden thing that didn't match the house at all, sitting there like a stubborn mistake. George insisted he needed a place for his man hobbies, as he called them with that teasing grin. In the end, I let him have it. You learn when to pick your battles in a long marriage. But I never stopped hating that shed. I used to joke that if anything ever happened to him, I'd tear it down and burn the pieces just to make myself feel better. After he retired, life settled into routines. George would wake me with a cup of tea. I'd make breakfast. Porridge for both of us, as dependable as sunrise. Then a bacon sandwich for him, because he'd grumble if he didn't get it. After that, he'd spend hours in the garden or in the shed tinkering with his model trains, his tools, his little projects. The same rhythm for years. Quiet, predictable, safe. Until a few weeks ago. It was a rainy Tuesday when I woke up feeling strange. It took me a moment to realize why. I had slept through the entire night, and that almost never happens. George always got up at least once to use the toilet, and I'm a light sleeper. I hear everything. A floorboard, a cough, the sound of the duvet shifting. I could count on one hand how many nights over the last few years he hadn't woken me at least once. Still, I wasn't alarmed, just groggy. I was lying there blinking into the dimness when George came in with my tea. "Morning," he said. I grunted, throat dry, and took the steaming mug. George had never been a handsome man, but I always loved his smile, especially in the mornings. It was reserved for me, familiar, kind. It made me feel like I was home. That morning, I looked at his smile and felt nothing. No warmth, no answering softness in my chest. It was as if my body didn't recognize it. Then I tasted the tea. It was wrong. I made a face, that involuntary little twist you can't hide, and I made an unhappy sound. "What's wrong?" George asked, and his smile slipped. "How many sugars did you put in?" I asked. "2," he said. "2?" I repeated, sharp enough to cut. "Yes. When have I ever had 2 sugars in my tea?" I shoved the mug back toward him. 3. Go make it properly. And you should think about seeing a doctor. Probably dementia. George barked a laugh and walked out with the mug like I'd made a silly joke, but behind my irritation there was a crawling unease. 40 years. Even through the worst of everything. Even through stressful times and long separations and all that fear. He had never messed up my tea. Not once. It was one of those small, intimate things you don't even think about until it's wrong. Eventually, with thirst still gnawing at me and my robe tied tight, I made my way downstairs. I was getting out the saucepan for porridge when George stuck his head into the kitchen from his office. "No porridge for me this morning," he said. "How about something more substantial? Are there any sausages left?" I opened the fridge. There were 4 sausages from last night, neatly wrapped. "Yes," I said. "Sausage and bacon sandwich, then?" "Perfect," he said. He smiled again, and still I felt nothing. I didn't smile back. It was like the connection between us had been cut, and I hadn't been told. I made my porridge while the rain eased, putting a little butter and honey on top the way I always do. Then I made George's sandwich, 3 rashers, 3 sausages, brown bread, and HP sauce. I brought it to him in his office. He was frowning at his computer. "What?" I asked, stepping closer to see. "Oh, nothing. Just thinking." He was looking at another model train on eBay. Another expensive one. One of those fancy German ones. A Fleischmann, I think the brand is. "That's rare," I said. "Going to buy that one, are you?" George smiled that hollow smile again and turned to me. "Maybe. It'd look great on the layout, wouldn't it?" I leaned in to look at the listing, and when I saw the details, my hands clenched. "You might want to check again," I said. He looked confused. "What do you mean?" The train he was looking at was N-gauge. His entire layout was Ho. That was when I knew it wasn't just a forgotten sugar count. It wasn't just getting older. That was a basic fact of his hobby. George could tell you scale sizes the way other men remember football scores. He'd spent years building that layout. He would never, ever make that mistake. The rest of the day passed without anything dramatic, mostly because I went into town. I told myself I needed groceries. Looking back, I think I just needed to get out of the house for a while, to breathe air that didn't feel wrong. Dinner became another problem. Around 5, I called George. "Yes, dear?" he answered. "I'm in town," I said. "Do you fancy a curry? I can pick it up on the way back." "Sounds lovely," he said. "I'm feeling like a chicken tikka madras." "For naan, too." My mouth went tight. "Right," I said, and I hung up. A man's curry order doesn't change. My husband always had a buna. Always. If he was feeling adventurous, he might go for something else, but not a madras, and certainly not four naan. He could barely finish one. By the time we sat down to eat, I was already tense, and then he made it worse. He ate like he hadn't eaten in days, not savoring, not enjoying, just shoveling food into himself. He barely chewed. It was wet and sloppy, an animal. He tore at the bread and used his hands in a way that made my skin crawl. And when he finished his own food, he reached over and ate most of mine too. My appetite disappeared so completely, it felt like it had been switched off. I sat there with my lips pressed together and a heavy pressure on my chest that I couldn't explain. When he finally pushed his plate away, I loaded the dishwasher while he headed back out to his shed. And I realized I couldn't keep this to myself. I had to call my daughter. Rebecca picked up on the third ring. "What? Is that any way to talk to your mother?" I snapped because I was already frayed and her tone hit a sore spot. I heard her sigh and shift. "Mum," she said, "why can't you just text like a normal person?" "Oh, I'm sorry," I said, my voice turning sharp and wounded. "Is speaking a crime now? Maybe I want to have an actual conversation with my only child." There was a pause. I stood at the sink, staring out into the night. The garden was black, the tree branches moving in shadow. The only warm light outside came from the shed's single window, a dull orange square in the dark. "Mum," Rebecca said, exhausted already, "it's a work night. I'm tired. I really don't want to do this. Can I talk to Dad instead?" "He's why I'm calling," I said. Her voice changed immediately. "Is he all right? Has something happened?" "Now you care," I said, because bitterness came out easier than fear. "Happy to talk to your father, just not your mother, are you?" "I'm going to hang up," she warned. Talking to her is always like pulling teeth, and I was too angry to be gentle. "No, Rebecca. Listen. Your father has been acting strange." Another sigh. "He's always been strange, no," I said. "I mean, he's been scaring me. That got her attention." "Scaring you how? Has he been violent?" "No. Of course not," I snapped. "Don't be stupid. He's just different." Then Rebecca's patience ran out completely. "Mum, he's always been different. Tell me what you mean." "No riddles. He's off," I said. "First he forgot how to make my tea. Then he ordered something he's never had before from the curry house. He even forgot what scale his trains are." The silence lasted so long I thought she'd hung up. Then she said, cold and tired, "Mum, you're just being weird, like always. Sometimes people try new things. Sometimes they forget stuff. I'm sorry we can't always be exactly who you want us to be." And then she did hang up. I stood alone in the kitchen, staring into the dark, feeling stupid and abandoned and frightened all at once. And that's when I saw him. He was standing at the shed window, looking out, looking at me. I don't know how long he'd been there, but I knew, in that instant, that he had been watching me. The light behind him turned him into a George-shaped silhouette, nothing but a shadow with a familiar outline. Then he stepped out of sight as if he'd been caught. Panic hit me so hard I felt it in my throat, cold and sudden, like being pushed into deep water. I couldn't breathe properly until I forced myself to. Eventually, I calmed down. I turned on the television and poured a glass of wine, then another. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I told myself it was stress, or age, or my imagination feeding on its own fear. When I went to bed around midnight, I went alone. That wasn't unusual. George often stayed in his shed late, tinkering. But that night I couldn't settle. I lay there drifting in and out, half awake, half dreaming. Then I heard him come in. I was facing away from the door. Normally, I wouldn't have reacted. That night, the hairs on the back of my neck lifted as if a current ran through them. My heart began to pound. I listened to him undress, the belt buckle, the soft sounds of clothes, the bathroom door opening, water running, the toothbrush. Then he got into bed. And I knew he wasn't my George. I felt his heat and the weight of his body as he pressed close, wrapping his arms around me. I went rigid. Every part of me recoiled. It felt like a stranger's touch, wrong in a way my brain couldn't translate into words. I felt breath at my ear. And then it whispered, very softly, like a secret meant only for me. I killed your husband. I don't know how I fell asleep after that, but I must have, because when I woke it was morning. Sunlight, birds, ordinary sounds that made what happened last night feel like it couldn't possibly be real. There was a knock at the door. What? I called, irritated and still half asleep. May I come in, dear? A voice asked. It was George's voice. Normal, familiar. I said yes, and in walked George with a mug of tea. My stomach turned so hard I thought I would be sick right there in bed. The sight of him, the exact shape of him, made last night rush back into my mind like a flood. But he smiled. It was George's smile, the one he gave me when he was trying to be gentle. I hesitated, then took the mug with trembling hands. I took a sip. 3 sugars, exactly right. You scared me a bit yesterday, he said. I scared you? I asked. My voice sounded high and strange even to me. He chuckled. Yes, you weren't well. Having one of your little episodes, I think. I sat there trying to make my mind line up with itself. Yesterday it felt so clear, so obvious. And now here was my tea, perfect, and his smile familiar and his voice calm. Was I wrong? Was this all just me, expecting life to follow my rules? I got up, dressed, went downstairs, and made breakfast. No odd requests. Porridge, bacon sandwich, the normal rhythm of our life. George smiled again as he reached for the back door. Going out? I asked. Yes, he said, checking the buds. The apple trees must be close to blooming. I watched him walk his garden, examining the branches of the apple trees the way he always did. Tender and careful. For a short while, I felt almost like myself again. I even thought about calling Rebecca to apologize for being short with her. Then George came back inside. I carried his breakfast into his office. And everything broke. He didn't eat like George. He tore into the sandwich with both hands, ripping chunks out and stuffing them into his mouth. He didn't pause. He didn't chew properly. He ate like he was trying to fill a hole that couldn't be filled. Then he grabbed the porridge bowl with both hands, ignored the spoon, and drank it down. When he finished, he turned to me and smiled. But that smile had none of George in it. There was no warmth, no kindness, no history. It was the smile of something that had learned what a smile is supposed to look like, but didn't understand why humans use it. I fled his office. I can't really run at my age, but I moved fast, out the front door, into the car. I drove without thinking. I was halfway to the town center before I fully came back into myself and realized my hands were clenched so tightly on the steering wheel that my fingers hurt. I wasn't mad. I wasn't confused. George, my husband, had to be dead, and something else was wearing him. I parked outside the police station while my heart hammered in my ribs. The building looked grim inside, all dull carpets and harsh lighting. Everyone seemed young, tired, and irritated. I hadn't been inside a police station in nearly 50 years, and for a moment I almost turned around and left. I didn't want to be the old woman they rolled their eyes at. But I stayed. Eventually, a young policewoman called me to the desk, her face already tired before I even spoke. I tried to explain, and I realized how impossible it sounded the moment the words left my mouth. How do you say, my husband is missing, but also he's at home and he isn't himself? I was passed around, repeating myself until my throat hurt. Finally, I ended up speaking to an overweight, bald sergeant whose face had that practiced look of pity. Look, ma'am, he said slowly, like he was talking to someone fragile. If you feel something's the matter with your husband, you need to speak to him. This isn't really a police matter. Anger rose up in me, hot enough to shake. I'd spent 20 minutes being treated like I was wasting their time. Is there anything you can do? I demanded. I refuse to leave unless you help me. It isn't safe at home, he sighed and rubbed his eyes. The most I can do is a welfare check, he said. A what? We can send someone to check that everyone is okay, that's all. But you'll come? To the house? Not me personally, he said, already done with me. A constable will be dispatched to your address to check on you and your husband. When? As soon as we can, he said, and his tone made it clear I was low priority. About an hour. But we have important work to do. If there's nothing else, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. It wasn't much, but it was something. If the police came to the house, I could make them see. I could make them understand that whatever was wearing George wasn't right. I just had to hold myself together long enough to show them. I drove to Tesco because I didn't know what else to do while I waited. I sat in the car park under heavy clouds, trying to eat a soggy sandwich I barely tasted. Everything felt unreal, like I was moving through a bad dream with my eyes open. Then I drove home. The closer I got, the more trapped I felt. Hedgerows tight on either side of the lane. The long drive up to the house. The sky darkening like evening had come early. Just a few minutes, I told myself. Just a few minutes until the police arrive. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys. I almost dropped them, and while I was still struggling, the door unlocked from the inside and swung open. And there it was. George's face. George's body. George's height and posture. But not George. It stood in the doorway with a hollow smile and ushered me in as if I was a guest. Welcome home, it said. George would never say that. Not like that. As I turned to pull the door closed, I saw a police car coming up the drive. Relief hit me so hard I almost cried. I swung the door back open and waved wildly. 2 officers stepped out, a young man and an older woman. They exchanged a look the way police do when they're already deciding what kind of situation they're walking into. The short policewoman went straight to the thing wearing my husband. Good afternoon, Colonel. It smiled and cut her off smoothly. Please, I'm retired now. Just George is fine. She nodded, like that matched what she expected. Right. Your wife came into the station earlier. Requested a welfare check. Some sort of domestic trouble? It put on a concerned expression so well I felt sick. Ah, I see. You'll have to forgive her, it said. She hasn't been quite herself recently. Age catches up with us all. The woman gave it a sympathetic smile. I cut in quickly. Can I speak with you privately, Constable? The edge in my voice made her frown. The young policeman stepped closer, ready. Of course, she said. Would you like to step outside for a minute? We stepped out, and I pulled the door closed behind us. The frosted glass hid details, but I could still feel it standing there on the other side, watching. That is not my husband, I said. The policewoman looked confused, her hands sliding toward her belt. What do you mean? We have him on file as, it looks like him, I said, forcing the words out. It sounds like him. But that isn't George. They shared a look. Last night, I added, and my voice shook. It told me it had killed George. A few minutes later, after I'd calmed myself enough to speak without sobbing, they still didn't believe me. Not really. But they could see I was terrified. That mattered more than belief. I opened the door again. It was still there, right behind it, standing as if it had never moved. As the door swung open, it smiled with easy confidence. "Excuse me, George," the male officer said carefully. "May we have permission to enter the house?" The policewoman jumped in quickly, trying to make it sound reasonable. "It's only that your wife seems unsettled. If we can look around, maybe it'll reassure her." "Of course," it said, and stepped aside with a welcoming gesture. They walked through the living room first. They looked at the photos along the mantel. There we were, me and George, younger, smiling. Rebecca as a girl. The three of us outside her university. George in uniform with medals on his chest. A more recent photo of George holding a trophy from a local gardening competition, his proud grin bright in sunlight. The officers looked from the photos to the thing in the room, and then to me. They spoke quietly to each other. I could see them thinking, it matches. It fits. This poor woman is confused. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I hadn't heard it move. I felt breath on the back of my neck, close enough that my skin tightened. And it whispered, soft as a lover, "No one will ever believe you." I spoke out loud without meaning to. Loudly, sharply, like my voice was trying to save me. "What did you just say?" Both officers stopped. They turned and looked at me, then at it. Confusion on their faces. It smiled and put its hand back on my shoulder, squeezing gently. Not comforting. Possessive, like testing the firmness of meat. I said, "I'll do whatever it takes to help you," it said smoothly. Then it glided toward the officers, charming and calm. "Is there anything else I can do for you?" The male officer spoke quietly into his radio. The female officer shook her head. "It's obvious you have everything under control," she said. Then she looked at me. "But you should probably get her seen by someone as soon as possible." The thing turned its head toward me and nodded. "Yes, she's had problems in the past. Hopefully a doctor can help her. Put a stop to these silly little notions." The policewoman agreed with it as if it were my husband and she was my neighbor. The male officer spoke next, and what he said made my stomach drop. "We've got her in our system now," he told it. "If she has problems, calls emergency numbers, comes down to the station again, we'll know. She won't waste resources next time." The thing acted grateful, guiding them to the door. "Thank you for coming," it said, polite as anything. Then it turned to me with that bright, horrible grin. "Well, dear, aren't you going to say goodbye to the kind officers?" I stood beside it at the door like I belonged to it. Rain had started outside, thin at first, then heavier. My chest was tight. My hands trembled. I looked at the short policewoman one last time. "Please," I choked out, barely able to form the word. She just smiled sadly and waved, like I was someone she'd never see again. And maybe she was right. They got in their car and drove away slowly, turning out of the driveway as the rain worsened and the wind picked up. The moment they were gone, the voice beside me changed. The politeness fell away like a mask dropped on the floor. "Don't you see?" It said coldly. "No one believes you. They never will. Not your police, not your doctors, not even your own child. Whatever you do, you're mine to do with as I please." I turned and ran into the house. I heard it behind me, and when I looked back, I saw its head twisted too far around on its neck, eyes tracking me even as its body stayed facing forward. It watched me like a predator that doesn't need to hurry. In the kitchen, I stopped and yanked the big carving knife out of the wooden block. My hands shook, but the weight of the knife gave me something solid to hold. "Stay back," I said, pointing it at the thing. Whatever games you want to play, whatever you are, I've had enough. It walked toward me calmly, smiling, moving with a swagger that didn't belong to my husband. It carried George's body like a costume, but the way it held itself was wrong. Too confident, too loose, like it didn't have the stiffness George had developed with age. He was a very special man, wasn't he? It said softly. Our dear, dear George. He was, I said. My throat hurt. I kept the knife up, held it steady as best I could. He was a great man. A laugh came out of George's mouth, but it wasn't George's laugh. It was sharp and ugly. Great? It said. Oh, I don't think so. It stopped a foot from the knife, close enough that I could see details of George's face that didn't belong, tiny changes around the eyes, an unfamiliar stillness in the skin, as if the muscles didn't move from the right places. Get out of my house, I said. It shook its head. All those shiny medals, all that money, he earned them, I snapped. He served our country. He was a great man, a real man. The thing's smile faded. Its face darkened. In that moment, I could barely see George in it at all. I felt foolish for ever doubting myself. Do you know what he did? It asked, voice lower now. How many were murdered on his word? I shook my head hard. George wasn't a murderer. George was gentle. Stubborn, yes. Difficult at times, yes. But gentle. What kind of murderer plants flowers for butterflies? What kind of monster builds apple orchards with his own hands? The thing looked angry, like I'd insulted it. Then it moved. So fast, I didn't even understand what was happening until it was done. It stepped in, ripped the knife out of my hand as if I were a child, and tossed it away like it weighed nothing. I ran. The only place left was the back garden. I threw myself through the door into the darkening evening, into wind and hard rain that slapped my face and soaked my clothes instantly. The apple trees, twisted and beautiful in daylight, looked skeletal in the storm. Branches reached and grabbed at me. Thorns tore my legs as I pushed deeper into the garden, hearing the wind howl like something alive. I looked back. The house was dark. The lights that had been on were gone. Every window was black. The back door swung on its hinges, banging in the wind like an open mouth. And even without seeing it, I could feel eyes on me. Hatred. Heat. A presence that wanted me to know it was still there. I kept moving until I saw the shed. Warm light spilled from its windows like it was a safe place, like it was still my husband's little world. I hated that shed. I always had. But in that moment, it was the only thing that looked like shelter. Blood ran down my legs from the scratches, mixing with rain. I reached the wooden door and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. The shed creaked and groaned in the storm. The wind hit it hard enough that the whole structure complained. I stood there, breathing fast, staring out through the small window toward the house. I waited for it to follow. But the house stayed empty. And then, suddenly, I knew. Whatever had been wearing George was gone. It was a strange certainty, immediate and clear, like when you feel the pressure drop before a storm breaks. The hostile focus that had been on me vanished. The air in the shed felt different. Lighter, less watched. I stood there confused, shaking, rainwater dripping from my hair. Why would it leave? Why stop when I came into the shed? My breathing slowed. I inhaled through my nose, and the smell hit me. A rank, thick smell that doesn't belong anywhere near a home. Sweet and rotten at the same time. Like meat left too long in heat. I turned around. George's train layout was running around the walls, little engines circling through tunnels and tiny stations. The lights on the miniature buildings were still on. Little painted families stood frozen on platforms, forever waving at nothing. Beneath the layout were his gardening tools, bags of soil and mulch, pots, rakes, cutters, all crammed in the tight space. And on the floor, half tucked near the shelving, was George. My George. His body was already changing. Darkened skin, swelling. A smell that made my eyes water. He'd been dead for days. His face was fixed in terror, as if he'd seen something coming and understood it too late. I don't know how long I stood there. Time did strange things. I remember gripping the edge of the workbench so hard my fingers hurt. I remember making sounds I didn't recognize as coming from me. When I could finally move, I tried everything. I called the police from my mobile. It didn't go through. I went back to the house and tried the landline. The moment I gave my name, everything changed. No matter what I said, no matter how I begged, how I screamed that my husband was dead, what I got back was an apology and a warning not to call again. Then I tried Rebecca. My hands shook so badly I dropped the phone once. When she finally answered, the call dropped almost immediately. Later, I was told she'd been asleep and had work early. I don't know what really happened. I only know that every line I reached for snapped away from me. I couldn't eat. I couldn't drive. I couldn't think in a straight line. I stayed in a kind of shock until morning, when the sky started turning pale again. Around 6, I finally got Rebecca on the phone. The conversation was short. She didn't believe me, or she didn't want to. But she contacted the police and they came again. Another welfare check, another set of uniforms. This time it was a different pair. A tall, bald black man and a heavy-set, red-faced woman. I hadn't washed. My clothes were rumpled. I must have looked wild-eyed. These two, at least, could see something was wrong without having to be convinced. I barely spoke. I just led them through the house, out to the shed. The moment they saw George, everything changed. They shut the whole place down. They called an ambulance. The coroner. More police. It felt like half the town poured onto my land. People walked through rooms that had been private for years, voices everywhere, questions coming at me from every angle. I didn't tell the full truth. I knew better. I gave them something they could write down without laughing. The tall officer questioned me gently, his voice calm in a way that almost made me cry. "And when did you realize?" he asked. "Last night," I said. I went out to check on him in the storm. I found him there. He looked at me for a long moment. "I'm sorry, but he's been dead for days." "Why didn't you look sooner?" I shrugged because I didn't have a real answer that would keep me out of handcuffs and padded rooms. "My memory hasn't been right," I said. "That's why George told the police to ignore me. I guess I just didn't notice his absence. He went away to speak with others. I saw the two officers from the day before arrive at some point, and I saw the way they spoke to him, the way they looked at me afterward like I was something unpleasant. They'd stepped in. Someone handed me a cup of tea, only 2 sugars. That detail still makes me want to scream. Not long after, they took me away. They were almost kind about it. I spent a night in a cell that smelled like urine, and officers spoke to me softly, like I was fragile, like I might break if they used a normal tone. After that, I ended up here. They investigated it as a possible murder, of course. I was the obvious suspect. An old woman in shock, a body on the property, days of delay. They looked at everything. They asked about George's work, about enemies, about politics, about extremists. They pulled apart our lives like it was all evidence. In the end, they told me George died of natural causes. Natural causes. No signs of violence, no toxins, no clear cause anyone could point to. But I know what I heard. I know what I felt in my bed when that thing wrapped its arms around me and breathed against my ear. I know what it whispered. I know the way its head turned too far. I know the way it smiled without love. I know the way it talked the police into seeing me as the problem. They put me in a mental hospital because, apparently, Any woman who doesn't notice her husband has been dead for days must be unwell, incapable, confused, dangerous, maybe, or at least inconvenient. Rebecca visited once. I don't even know what I expected. Some comfort, some shared grief, some anger aimed at the right target. Instead, she walked in with disgust on her face, like she was forcing herself to do a chore. She looked at me the way you look at something that embarrassed you in public. Her words were short, her manner shorter. "I never want to look at you again," she said. Useless. That's what she called me before she left. I can still hear it, like it's stuck in my ear. Maybe I deserve it. Maybe I don't. I honestly can't tell anymore. I keep turning everything over in my mind, trying to find the point where I could have changed the ending. Trying to find the exact moment where the world became wrong. And I still don't understand why it wore my husband's face, why it stayed long enough to ruin me, why it left the moment I ran to the shed, and why, if it was done with me, it bothered to make sure nobody would believe a word I said. So that's it. It's all here now, as close as I can put it into words. The truth, or what I think is the truth. And even after writing it down, I'm left with the same thing I've had since that rainy Tuesday morning. I don't know. I don't know what came home with my husband. And I don't know whether I'm ever going to get out of this place.